right, it is great to be with you all today. I'm excited to be sharing with you more about artificial intelligence. And before I get in, just to give you a little bit of perspective of really how I see the world and also where we'll go today. I've spent really the last 25 years working in technology in some form or fashion, and really the past 15 years in this field of data science and artificial intelligence. And so today what we're going to do is talk a little bit about context and how we got to where we are from an artificial intelligence perspective. We'll spend a little bit of time in the middle of the talk talking about macroeconomic trends, industry, what we're seeing and how this is changing jobs and the workforce. And then towards the end, I'll talk about AI literacy and what that means for everyone in this room. And I'll also give you a case study. Towards the end, we'll have some time for a question and answer. And during our case study, I'll actually share with you a little bit more about QuantHub and how we're actually using generative AI to build curriculum that teaches artificial intelligence. So I'm looking forward to this journey with you all today. So first, let's talk about really how we got here. And for that, I'm going to share a little bit of my background story, because the first time I really thought about data science or artificial intelligence, I was actually sitting on a horse in the middle of the Costa Rican jungle in the pouring down rain. See, as a teenager, I had dropped out of high school and written software to start a company that basically managed internet cafes. And while I did that for money and traveled up and down the Pan American Highway, my real passion was actually leading medical and dental relief teams into remote jungles, deserts, and mountains of the developing world. And so on this particular summer, I'd been there for a couple of months, and where we lived was pretty remote. So we would fly in, then take a bus, then take a boat, then take a horse to get where we lived, about 250 acres of land. We had no electricity, no running water. We bathed in a local river where the crocodiles also bathed. And it was really quite a great summer for a teenager. But on this particular occasion, we were hosting a group of doctors and dentists who were going to come in, who were doing medical clinics up and down the river. And one of our few luxuries was this propane stove. And think of like if you've got a grill in your backyard, it was essentially one of these. And we ran out of gas for this. We used it for cooking. We ran out of gas at the worst possible time. And so this was sort of 3, 4 in the afternoon. I said, hey, I got this. And I did what we did when we ran out of propane is you basically ride to the nearest village and you swap it out and you get a new propane stove. There's a little small pulperia there where you could buy Coca-Cola, batteries, and propane. And so I mounted this propane tank on this horse and I ride off into the jungle. And it was the rainy season, which meant 16, 18 hours of rain a day. And the mud there was so thick that our horses would sometimes get stuck in the mud, and you would have to get another horse to pull your horse out. So most of us from Alabama, I imagine you're familiar with this from a vehicle standpoint, but this was how tough it was then. But this slog would take about an hour to get to this little pulperia. I swap out the propane stove, and I turn around as I'm coming back, it's getting dark. And I had, in my haste, not really grabbed a flashlight, and got a little bit nervous about this because it also started pouring down rain. And so right as it was getting dark, sort of the saving grace was that there was a lightning storm. So lightning would brighten up the sky, and then it'd go dark, light, dark, and I look down and I'm holding this giant canister of gas, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what if, I'm not wearing gloves, what if lightning strikes this tank? And then I realized, electrocution is probably the least of my worries if lightning strikes this tank. As I continued in this process, eventually the lightning stopped and sort of there was no light. And I was trying to decide what to do, and I thought about maybe just like sitting under the horse, sleeping till the morning. And then I realized, well, there was a jaguar that had been killing some local livestock in the area, so I decided that was not really an option. And pretty much when I sort of lost all hope, I remembered what a Costa Rican had told me when I first got there. He said, these horses know these trails so well, you almost don't even have to guide them. And so I kind of did, the only thing I knew left to do is I just let the reins down and just let the horse sort of clump along through the dark jungle. Eventually, we actually saw candlelight in the distance, and I was shocked and elated to see that we had made it back home. And I share that story because that night, something I realized that's really stuck with me, this has been probably 25 years now, is that those horses were used to a pattern and a routine, and the path was the same path they went every day, and they knew that process. And we humans are a lot like those horses. we have routines and patterns in our lives that we get accustomed to and we follow. And as I've lived and worked in different countries around the world, I've actually seen this with culture shock, where you actually can get headaches and depression and things like this, not so much because the foreign culture is bad, but because you've lost all of these memorized techniques of where to buy your groceries and just all those things that you've sort of put in the muscle memory, and your brain is working in overdrive just to figure out those basics. And so it's a real challenge. And one of the early doctors who actually studied these concepts, these paths and patterns and routines, was a surgeon by the name of Dr. Joseph Bell. And Dr. Bell lived he worked in the Royal Infirmary of Scotland in the mid-1800s. And he was so good at studying these paths and patterns that he actually, I may walk around a little bit here. He studied these so much that he would actually collect tobacco leaves. And so he could walk into a room and tell you which of his colleagues had been in the room before him just by the smell of the different types of tobacco. And he could shake your hand and know by the calluses on your hand whether you swung a hammer or held a fountain pen for a living. And he was so good at these things that the police actually started asking him to consult on murder cases. And he was actually sort of what we would call ultimately one of the really first well-known data scientists, if you will. But one of his clerks was so fascinated by these stories of him consulting on all these cases, he started writing about him. And he changed a little bit, but he ultimately called him Dr. Sherlock Holmes. And so these stories that we know are actually built based on this, one of the world's sort of first famous data scientists, if you will. But in this process, this whole concept of really just thinking about these paths and patterns and routines that guide our everyday life actually undergird really everything, especially as we move into artificial intelligence and data science. And so what I want to do is I realize that at this conference, we have a broad spectrum of people here. I imagine there's some folks in the audience who know Python and are comfortable building machine learning models. And I imagine there are others that just want to figure out what does this mean and how is this changing industry and what is all the hype about, or maybe what stock should I buy, or that sort of thing. And so one of the challenges of speaking at a conference like this is how do I keep everyone engaged and give everyone something relevant that you can walk away with. And I'm going to do my best to split the middle today. But so what I want to do first, though, is really just give you a practical understanding of artificial intelligence. And maybe even for those of you who are experts in this field, this gets you cocktail party ready so that you can explain it to those lesser mortals who are still struggling with the concepts. So where this all starts, we're talking about Dr. Bell and ultimately Sherlock Holmes. If we actually look back into the 60s, the co-founder of Intel, Gordon Moore, coined this phrase that became known as Moore's Law. It was really more of an observation. And that was the number of transistors on microchips doubles about every 2 years. And we're also seeing the pricing of these microchips drop over that same period of time. And so it's this fascinating, this is a logarithmic curve here, so it's actually an exponential curve. It's this fascinating trend that I think all of us, to some extent, might be tempted to say, when is this going to slow down? Surely we're going to run out of physical space on microchips, and we're going to see this plateau, and this has got to stop at some point. Well, a couple of years ago, I gave this talk at a TEDx conference, and I used this little device right here as an example of how amazingly small these things are getting. This is a computer built by IBM, cost about 10 cents to make. It's a millimeter square. And for those of you that were around in the 90s, if you had a Tandy or a Packard Bell computer, it was about that level of power. And this is 64 of these glued together on the right. So as fascinating as this technology is, I'm constantly refreshing this talk, and you're going to see some slides today that are less than a week old. But about a year ago, I found University of Michigan has a new model that's taken the place of the world's smallest computer. This is the Michigan Micromote. This thing is 0.3 millimeters by 0.3 millimeters, 0.09 square. So we're talking about, in a couple of years, it's 1/10 the size of this prior computer. So as we see these trends emerging, by the way, this is a grain of rice, so it's about 1/10 the width of a grain of rice. As we see these trends emerging and the cost and the ubiquity of these sensors and technologies getting cheaper, we're seeing these sensors that capture data show up in more and more places. So just this week, I saw this ad. I don't know if anybody's seen this yet. So I'm definitely going to pre-order one of those. And this is not a deep fake. This is on Ring's website. They're really pushing this. But it's just constantly fascinating to see all of the new technologies and capabilities that are coming out. But with these trends occurring, there are a couple of underlying concepts I want you to be aware of. The first one is this idea that the amount of data in the world is increasing exponentially. So we go back to Sherlock Holmes. He used data to create inferences and insights and to better understand the world around him, the past, and also predict the future. So with more and more data, we have more capabilities of doing this. But another trend is happening in parallel, and that is the processing ability per dollar is continuing to increase exponentially. And so we're seeing these two curves at the same time. The amount of data to use is getting more and more, and the cost of analyzing this data is dropping simultaneously, which gives us really this, for any of you in the room that have been data scientists, or there's this luxury of not having to be efficient, right? You just throw everything against the wall and say, I've got enough processing power, enough compute, that I can build something really interesting and not have to be precise. So a fun digression I will make, and this is an unsubstantiated rumor, so do not quote me on this, but I've talked to a number of Microsoft executives that have said, yeah, that sounds about right. One of the ways that ChatGPT really hit this huge leap in progress that we saw a couple of years ago is actually related to the fall of crypto back in, I think it was about 2019. If you guys have been following it, it was really going up, and all of a sudden it just hit this cliff. And we were using NVIDIA GPUs to mine these cryptocurrencies, and all of a sudden there was this giant basically inventory of GPUs. It no longer made sense to mine crypto at a certain valuation. I remember I had someone give me one of these mining rigs, and I was like, okay, I'm not doing crypto, but thank you. And so it sat in my shed for a couple of months because literally just the economics didn't work. So Microsoft had invested heavily in these for their Azure server environment, and when they struck a deal with OpenAI, there were these economics at play where OpenAI was able to take advantage of something that might have otherwise taken a much longer time for them to buy, all of this server space, and you get this run-up in ability to build some of these early models. And so QuantHub has actually been an OpenAI beta customer since before ChatGPT. We joined when it was GPT-3. And those were interesting, but they were certainly not, I would call it, ready for production type models. So those of you who have been following the news, this week, DeepSeek has obviously been the big thing, the Chinese model that came out. And if you look closely at what's happened there, is it's really a continuation of these trends, but it's slightly different. And essentially, they took a different approach, and they had more constrained resources. And they said, how could we build a model like this without spending $100 million to build this model? And so they're currently saying they spent about $5 or $6 million on the current iteration of this DeepSeek model. And so as we'll talk about in a little bit, it's actually not that much better than a ChatGPT or a Claude type model, but the invention was the ability to actually figure out how to build it with fewer resources. So now that we've done it with sort of this brute force, people are starting to get smarter and figure out, how can I do more with less? I would submit to you today that these trends are going to continue. They may look a little bit different, but we're going to continue to see more data to analyze, cheaper ways to analyze that data. So here's an example of some of these large language models and as they've been trained. So we typically measure these in what are called petaflops or petaflops. And essentially a petaflop is 1 trillion calculations per second. And so it's a quadrillion calculations. So if you remember, the Nobel Prize was given away a couple months ago to the group from University of Toronto, some of those folks that invented one of the early large language models. This one, AlexNet, used about 470 petaflops, okay? 470 quadrillion calculations per second. By comparison, 470 Gemini Ultra, which came out about a year and a half ago, used 50 billion petaflops. So again, this is a logarithmic curve, so it's really an exponential chart, but just showing you the differences here. OpenAI's O3, they haven't published all of this data, but from the white papers that I can kind of source together, it looks like they use somewhere between 80 and 400 billion petaflops to train these models. So we're seeing this continue to happen with these generative AI models. So when you start looking at those trends in terms of their abilities and capabilities, it shouldn't be a surprise that we're getting better and better with these capabilities. Okay, so let's talk about how AI works. And I'm going to oversimplify this, but hopefully this all makes sense. So let's talk about image recognition. If I wanted to feed this image into a computer and figure out what it is, classify it, do something with it, there are a series of steps that we would take. Again, forgive me for oversimplifying this, but if you look close enough to a monitor or a screen, you'll notice there are a series of pixels that make up the image. And those pixels essentially can have numbers associated with them. In a black and white instance, it's how much, how dark the image is or how much light there is. But essentially, it's just a number. And just thinking about it in these terms, we get into sort of this mathematical puzzle, if you will. Does anybody have one of these at home? I have a theory that there is some sort of contagion effect, and I want you to go home and test this. If you have one of these, empty the drawer next to it and come back in 6 months and see if you have another one of these in the drawer next to the one that originally started. And I would submit to you that there's some sort of contagion. I think I have 3 of these now. Imagine for a moment you actually wanted to do the unthinkable and sort this and put these where everything goes. Well, one of the things that we could do is start with the coins and use one of my favorite machines, the Coin Sorter 4000. Anybody have one of these at home? Ever play with these? There's a lot of fun. You put all your coins in, they're mixed together, you turn this crank, and essentially what happens is it runs the coins up this conveyor belt and drops them into these bins, and it classifies them based on a single parameter. Okay, I'm using some of the verbiage you'll be hearing this week. So that classification process is simply saying how wide is each of these coins, and based on that, I'm going to put it in 4 different bins. So that's essentially one layer of this process. And to do image recognition, we're going to need a lot of these, right? We're going to need millions, or as we were talking about, billions of these layers to get us to that point where we can actually start to combine all of these insights together, these single parameters and variables, so that we can actually do very sophisticated classification. And if we do this over and over again, think of this instead of 4 bins, you've got millions of bins that are being established as these sort of coins, if you will, go through each one of these different layers. And so what's happening is it's identifying, hey, this image has an ear, therefore it's a mammal, or it goes into this category, hey, it's got a fin, it goes over here. And think about this concept or technology has been around for decades, back to I want to say the 60s or 70s. So the concept is not new, but where we have this really sort of this critical mass is we've finally gotten to the point where, back to those original charts, we have the data, we have the processing power, we can now actually start to do really interesting things with this. For example, the scrolls of Mount Vesuvius sort of remained unread for thousands of years because if you just tried to open them, they would fall apart into ash because of the volcanic eruptions. But teams actually in a contest this last year were actually able to use image recognition using the same idea and predict where the layers separated and where the ink would have stuck through by using the same process of just brute force of imagery and just thousands and thousands, well, billions, I should say, of parameters being used to extract these. So the next time you see one of these images right here, this actually doesn't mean anything, right? This is just an icon. It's showing us that this is a neural network or this is going through that process. Okay, so again, I know I've grossly oversimplified this, but hopefully it's useful for folks that just want to kind of sit in the middle and say, I'm not going to learn how to code Python, but I want to kind of deconstruct this and think about, if I understand it, I can kind of better predict where these things are going. But if you can deconstruct, then you can also construct. And so if we flip this process, we can start doing things like creation, so image creation. So if we wanted to create a human face back in 2014, this is about as good as we could have gotten. But as we've watched the years go by and the progression of this computing power, the data, the resources, and the people throwing things at it, it's getting pretty darn good. So this is from a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com, and these people do not exist. And they're just completely, and these are actually, I think, about 3 years old now. So as we progress, you start seeing these get better and better and better. But I have to warn you, what that also creates is the possibility for deepfakes. And I want to warn you that you may see images, particularly in politics, that may be of questionable accuracy, this one being an example. So if we can do this with imagery, think about how we can do this with other fields like audio. So here's a great website called Udio. I'll show that you can actually create the lyrics, the music, the audio, etc. So let me give you a couple of quick examples. This is one of my favorites.
I tell you fellas, I've been caught out doing something I really shouldn't. Gonna plead ignorance, gonna tell them about how if I'd have known better, I just wouldn't. Oh. When they say drinking turpentine ain't where it's at, insurance fraud is a federal crime. Well, I didn't know that. You're telling me now for the first time.
There's your country western. I won't play this full song, but I'll show you one more that's pretty fascinating to listen to.
Dreams are whispering, nights rising, paths are twisting, hopes devising, hearts are rebel, minds defiant. Hear me, God, in this moment, giant jars are falling, shadows calling, hearts are breaking, faith is shaking, youth in darkness, dreams are silent, searching answers, feeling violent. Why'd you leave me? Can you see me? Rebel running, storm is coming, eyes are misty, soul is twisting, heart in pieces, world is drifting. God, I'm calling. Tears are falling, hear my anger, feel my danger, lost and lonely. Are you only watching?
So I won't play this whole song. One of the fascinating things as you listen to this, it actually bothers some people because she doesn't breathe. So it's this just on and on and on. And I actually share that on purpose because it really kind of creates this new philosophical question around, like, how is music and arts and entertainment being reinvented and changed, and where will we start seeing where all of a sudden maybe we actually like AI songs better than those created by humans. So we can also do video. This is the best I could find a few years ago. Now, notice our quality upgrade in our political videos fast forward a few years. So more practically, we can also do text. So this is an example as we think about creating from nothing. This is from ChatGPT 4, but it's a really simple concept of, if I give you a particular sentence, can you guess what is going to come next? And I imagine most of the folks in the room have used some form of ChatGPT or Claude at this point, so this should not be very new. I will point back to DeepSeek. Again, this is early days where it's actually been published for a couple of months, but just recently has really I would say Wall Street and the tech community really taken notice of DeepSeek's new capabilities. But what ChatGPT and others have done early on is essentially give me every book in the world, and then I will build a model that responds to every book in the world and estimates, if you say this, what is the most likely thing to come next. What DeepSeek has done is said, how can we be more efficient? And if you ask a legal question, just give me the legal books. Or if you ask a medical question, just give me the medical. And so it goes a lot deeper as opposed to just trying to brute force everything through this. Some practical examples as we'll start turning the corner and talking about AI literacy. One example of how we use this at QuantHub is we've responded to different government RFPs and RFIs and things like that. And now a process that used to take weeks and months can sometimes take hours. And what's happening here is we've got Claude is actually, I've uploaded an example of a government contract and I've said, build me a proposal for this contract. And it does that really pretty quickly. And the way that we did this is we created a series of documents that we feed to Claude. And with Claude and ChatGPT and others, you can save it as a project. And so you're not doing this every time. And I'll take, our learning philosophy at Quant Hub, brochures that go deeper into, who we're selling to, articles in the news that have been written about us, pretty much everything that I could think of, press releases, and I pre-feed the model so it knows everything about our company. So when you ask it a question, it's much more dialed in from a prediction standpoint. So seeing a lot of interesting outcomes here. So about 2 years ago, Accenture looked at, with this new concept of generative AI coming out, how could this impact industry? And in these charts here, what they did is they looked at this dark blue is higher potential for automation and light blue is higher potential for augmentation. What is this going to mean on an industry by industry basis? And they estimated about 40% impact really across industries. This last week in Davos, they released the new Future of Jobs report of 2025, where they interviewed thousands of CEOs around the world and asked them how generative AI is going to impact their industry. And what was fascinating to me about this is you've got super high capacity for skills like reading, writing, math, marketing, and media. So we're beginning to see, again, from what I was just showing you, if you think about how audio is going to change the audio industry. I was talking to a friend who does, he's on the TV show Billions and does a lot of acting, and he's done a lot of voiceover work. We were talking a few weeks ago, and he said, Josh, in the last couple of months, up to this point, 50% of my income was from voiceover and audio, and that has gone down to zero. And so we're starting to see real impact in terms of how organizations, we were talking to a group of accountants yesterday, and I kind of jokingly said, how soon until I can have ChatGPT do my taxes? And they said, probably next year. So we're starting to see these things that were once in the distance, like, hey, when is this going to happen? We're starting to see them actually land. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think there's this natural inclination to be reminded of this, one of these early entertainment AIs, HAL 9000, and this idea, this ominous idea of, oh no, we're going to be replaced. But I would encourage you really to rethink the way that we see this and really use one of the more modern entertainment AI characters of Iron Man and think about how can I actually use this to be better at my job, to do more things, to make life easier. And it's a lot more, I think, exciting if you think about the ability to don a spacesuit and fly all over the place, or in the latter Iron Man years, do it remotely, that sort of thing. So what does that look like for us in our day-to-day jobs? Well, from a science standpoint, as of last week, The Atlantic revealed an article that we're seeing that scientists that are using AI in their research are seeing significant gains in the number of patents and the number of discoveries that they're finding. And within those scientists that are using AI, if you divide those even further into those that are using it significantly versus those that are just kind of dipping their toe in the water, we're seeing as much as an 81% boost in new discoveries, new patents, and so forth. So I think from a perspective shift, it really yields this question, okay, I get it. So this is changing things. This is a little bit scary. Maybe it's very scary. What do I need to do about this? How do I need to change? How do I need to be thinking about what this means for me personally? And one of the first things that I'll point out that I think is a critical underlying factor for us all to be aware of is skill inflation. It's been a year and a half or 2 years since we've gotten comfortable with this idea of inflation being a major thing we need to think about from a financial standpoint, but we need to start thinking about this from a job and capability standpoint. And so as an example, a couple years ago, McKinsey estimated that over a 10-year period, you had about 10% job churn. And this is not people getting fired and rehired and that sort of thing, but this is old jobs like ice block delivery basically no longer being a thing, and new jobs like Mr. Beast on YouTube and influencers and things like that now being an actual revenue stream and a career that people are going into. So this structural job churn used to be about 1% per year. So based on the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report, these numbers are at about 23% over 5 years now. 23% over 5 years. That's almost 5% a year. So if I told you today that I've got my entire life savings in a money market account and I'm earning 1% interest on this, would you pat me on the back and say, great job? You would probably shake me on the shoulders and say, get it out of that bank and move it somewhere that's going to get you 4% or 5% or whatever the current number is, right? Because in your mind, I'm losing money because as the economy inflates, literally my dollars will get me less far than they would have previously. We're in a scenario where the same thing can be said of skills. And whatever skills that you possess today, no matter how old you are, no matter where you are in your career, are seeing a higher level of inflation. And so what we have to do is begin thinking about how do we upskill and how do we continue to stay current and relevant. And with 1% inflationary environment, you could work a 30-year career, and at the end of your career, like people are laughing, behind your back that your secretary's printing your emails for you and things like that, and hey, he's, out of date or she's, no longer with it. But you could still get your job done. But now if we're talking about 5% per year, your entire job over the next 30 years is likely to change substantially. And as someone who has kids in school, my daughter's a freshman this year at the University of Alabama, the jobs that she's looking at are going to look substantially different by the time that she graduates. So we've got to start thinking about how we upskill in this new inflationary environment. And so not surprising if you look at this World Economic Forum report again, and they look at skill usage across companies, the biggest ones that are in demand by CEOs at 87% AI and big data, and then network, cybersecurity, and technological literacy coming in third. And I'll suggest that technological literacy can be named a few different things, but it's really this understanding of data and AI and how these tools are changing the world around us. So it's increasingly important to do this, but also to understand the art of the possible. Not just what is this, but how can I apply this? How can I use this? What are some of these tools? And so to that end, I'll share with you roughly 8 different core concepts around AI literacy that I think are important for everyone to know. And the first of these is basically a fundamental understanding. What is it? How does it work? Some of the things that we've been talking about. And in a few moments, I'll actually dig deeper into some of these. So we've got AI ethics and safety. You've got practical skills. You've got critical evaluation, output of assessment. Can I actually trust this model that I'm using? We've got societal impact, technical awareness, understanding responsible usage, and communication. So all of these are critical areas that I would suggest that we all need to be thinking about how do we learn this. And at Quant Hub, we're actually teaching this in schools in Alabama. So if you have someone in a K-12 school, it's a public school, it's actually available to the school. The teacher or principal just has to raise their hand and say, hey, we want this in our school. And we actually teach these skills, data literacy skills as well. And we're also in a number of universities. So my advocation, really starting with my 7th grader, is everyone should graduate knowing these types of things so that you can be ready for those jobs of tomorrow. So let's talk about a few of them. So first of all, best practices. So best practices, Deloitte put out this good chart. It's kind of simple, but I think it helps illustrate when should I use AI in my job. Now, there are a lot of security issues you need to be aware of. If I have a legal document and I send it to ChatGPT, am I sending something that's supposed to be secure to a third party unnecessarily? We've seen when we do work with the government, we've heard stories of people asking ChatGPT questions and getting answers that are actually classified information being spit out of ChatGPT, which tells us that people are not using it right because they're uploading classified information to ChatGPT. But understanding this is important, but also just, is it appropriate from a technology standpoint to do this? And so this graph right here, generation effort, is just how hard is it to do. Validation effort is how easy is it to validate that this is an accurate output. So something like creating marketing copy for a website, it takes some work to get it done, but it's actually relatively easy to read it and say, yeah, that looks good, or no, that needs to be changed. Similarly, creating a product image or some sort of promotional item. But think about something like drafting a contract. If you don't have legal expertise, then essentially your validation effort is very difficult. And so this is going to be hard to ensure that, hey, this is actually right. So this is something you don't want to do. But on the other hand, something like drafting a contract with legal expertise. Maybe you're a lawyer, maybe you're doing a first round draft or a template or something like this, and you know that you can go through and skim it and say, yeah, this is right, no, this is wrong. That's where you might actually consider applying this. Again, I'm just going to hit some of these AI literacy concepts at a high level. One of them is tool selection, just understanding the world is broader than ChatGPT. What are some of the other models on the internet? What can I do with them? And here's one that is hard for me to keep up, but this is recent as of this week. So here's some of your major models like Claude, DeepSeek, ChatGPT, Gemini, and Meta. I personally tend to use Claude as much or more than ChatGPT. Those are the two that, and I'll actually have two screens pulled up at the same time, and I'll have one of them do the work, and I'll paste it into the other and say check the work of the first one, and a lot of times you get a much better outcome. But if you look at these benchmarks like undergraduate level knowledge, then you've got some of the math, coding, and so forth. The dark blue is best in class. And GPT-03, no surprise, is best in class here. But you'll notice no one model is best at everything. And so understanding what are the strengths and weaknesses of these different models, when would I use one if I'm doing heavy math work versus, say, coding, evaluation, and things like that. Just staying up to date is something. You can no longer write an AI textbook in a college setting. By the time you write an AI textbook and get it published and distributed, people will laugh at it because it's so old and out of date, right? So the refresh rates of these, AI is obviously the bleeding edge, but think about, I talked about accounting earlier, or the legal industry. Think about how AI is changing those industries. And if you're training someone new in that industry, one of the things that we need to do is to figure out how do we get curriculum to market faster, given the fact that, again, I had to change this slide yesterday. I change it every couple of months because whatever's, if we're trying to teach tool selection, this is the wrong answer 6 months from now. So just understanding that the refresh rate is increasing. There's also something called context window. I hate that they use tokens because nobody really kind of has a general idea of what that means. It's an approximation for words. But if you get a sense of like Gemini 2, their new model, it's pretty interesting. You can upload about 2,500 pages to Gemini before you start asking it questions. So think about the types of manuals and documentation and things that you can pre-train before you actually start asking. Some of the other models are less. You've got 250 or 500 pages. I found that you cannot upload a 500-page PDF to Claude because 500 pages is really like text only. So understanding what are the limits of these parameters, how do I get smart about using these? There's a lot of opportunity for learning here. Output assessment. Anybody see this PR disaster by Google a couple months ago? They sort of overwoke their models, and so if you asked for early founding fathers and things like that, it was not exactly historically accurate. So this only lasted for about 6 months, and everybody just kind of snickered and went along and said, okay, I'm sure they'll fix it. But what's actually more interesting is this researcher, David Rosado, said, I wonder what kind of political bias is in all of these models. And so, the foundation model, just can this thing speak and talk and operate? What he found is that they're generally, when you give them political tests, they're generally pretty neutral and unbiased. But on the other hand, if you look at the model that's released to the public, so again, it's being trained to not teach you how to make bombs or biological warfare, that sort of thing. So we know that they're tuning these models before they get to the public. What we see is they're actually, all of them, pretty far left-leaning and libertarian in their responses. Now, again, the problem with this talk is that inevitably some of my slides were always out of date. So these models are slightly, this is GPT-4, some of the earlier models. So who knows if they've since updated that, tweaked that, or whatever. So we'll see if David has done some more work in this. Okay, AI ethics. This is an area that is actually really interesting if you peel back the onion. Anybody here Van Gogh fans? I love Van Gogh. Can you spot the Van Gogh? So 3 different images here. One of these is by Van Gogh. And first of all, I'm curious, just personally, how many of you like the one on the left the best? Show of hands. What about the one in the middle? The one on the right? Okay, so fairly split. I would say right's a little bit ahead. This one is Van Gogh, and this one is Millet. So he actually copied Millet. and then I copied them both. This is me in Midjourney with about 5 minutes worth of work. So, ethical question. Was it okay for me to copy Van Gogh or Millet? Was it okay for Van Gogh to copy Millet? And so when we start getting to these ethical conversations, you can say, well, I don't know, what were the copyright laws? What's the, there's sort of the legal answer. There's maybe the, what am I allowed to do? But then maybe there's also, what do I disclose that I do? I told you pretty quickly, I did this in Midjourney. Is it okay for me to, try and, masquerade this as an oil paint? It would actually be fun to have this, basically have one of those replica shops do this in oil. But obviously disclosing these sorts of things. So think about this from an ethical standpoint. This is something when we work with universities that's a really common topic. Depending on the university, it's very common that the AI policy for the university is have a policy in your class. And then each instructor or faculty member gets to set their own policy. And it's like, you do what you want to do, just make sure that it's clear to the students. And so we're seeing some instructors say, absolutely no generative AI. We believe it will atrophy your muscles and your capabilities, and we want you to learn. Others are like, use it. Personally, when I was growing up, we had to do really what I thought was stupid things like learning long division. And if you remember at the time, it was like, well, you're not going to be carrying a calculator around in your pocket everywhere you go. So fast forward, does that same argument still hold for the things that we say are table stakes like I don't know, writing? I know that my handwriting skills have atrophied significantly. And I hate that. My wife laughs at it, but it's like, I'm not going to become a doctor, so I don't even know that it, does it even matter? I can type everything. I can type on my phone. I can do voice. So there's a lot of ethical conversations that need to be had around this, and I think a structured conversation is important. And in just a few minutes, I'll go to Q&A. Okay, future preparedness. We can take images, and we can add prompts to them and create, deepfakes like I was showing you earlier, like 2 men in a wedding or a man sitting in a metro. So researchers at MIT have recently come out with models to essentially prevent that. So these are called encoder attacks and diffusion attacks, where you can actually put code into your source image to prevent it from being replicated. And so I would suggest there's going to be an entire world or field around just mitigating. So I wouldn't call it cybersecurity, but it's sort of this new space of technology. And I would submit to you that there are going to be many new industries and fields and jobs. We talked about that job churn, that 23%. Okay, old jobs are going away. We no longer have a legal clerk, right? What do we get in its place? What are the new things that start coming online? And so when I talk to my kids about what they're going to do in their field, I try and help them skate to where the puck is going. So it's not look at this catalog of jobs and pick from this catalog, but it's what do you enjoy doing and where is that field going to be in 4 to 5 years? So my daughter wants to go into biology. That's great. But you're not going to be looking through a microscope. You're going to be looking at a monitor, right? Because these things are changing. So how do you think about analyzing things differently? And so, sorry, I have a tendency to start preaching on some of these things. Let me show you a quick case study, and then it looks like we've got plenty of time for question and answer at the end. And so I mentioned earlier Quant Hub. We work pretty much in every industry. We have some government projects. We're in corporations. We teach adults everything from the basics of data and AI literacy to more advanced topics. But we're also in K-12 and higher ed. And one of the things, this is our platform, one of the things that really keeps me up at night about all of this is as we deliver education through a method that we're pretty pleased with, I still have night sweats when I read articles like this. I don't know if anybody saw this, but Chegg's stock basically dropped 99%. And it's this online tutoring company, and basically ChatGPT has taken down this giant. And we're going to see this again and again in other places. It's companies that are caught asleep at the wheel, that are not paying attention, that are doing what I call ostriching. They're just sticking their head in the sand and saying it's going to go away, it's going to be a fad, and then they wake up and their stock is worth $1.17. But it makes me say, we're an education company. At what point are we going to wake up and people say, why do I need Quant Hub? Why don't I just ask ChatGPT or Claude to teach me? And I submit that as a broader question, really sort of a philosophical thought for my fellow, educators in the room and those of you in academia. The thing that keeps me comfortable is that there are a lot of reasons that we're, I guess as someone who provides this, there are a lot of reasons that we're far away from this, from hallucinations, from explainability. You've got different types of biases. You've got security issues. Like even with the new DeepSeek model that's coming out, I think I saw yesterday the Navy has banned it. And it's an open source model, but in many of these cases, we just don't know what we're getting into, and most people are operating off of headlines. And so what we have done at QuantHub is we have said, how do we leverage the best of generative AI, but we do it in a safe and ethical manner? Now, we've seen some of our competitors expose chatbots to kids in the classroom. Hey, you can learn straight from this conversation bot. Isn't this amazing? That's fine for them. We're not going to do that just yet because we don't trust it. And when they're right on math 90% of the time, as someone who has used this to tutor my kids, it's incredibly frustrating when the quote-unquote expert is telling you the wrong answer and you just throw out the baby with the bathwater. One of my kids refuses to use it. The other one uses it extensively in an ethical way. She uses it to tutor herself, like to ask herself test questions and things like that. But what we've decided to do is, what if we use it to accelerate the curriculum development process? I talked earlier about how we need to be able to change curriculum faster and faster. So how do we get to market? And so one of our internal KPIs we're talking about as a company is time to market. How quickly can you give us a subject and we create a rigorous curriculum that would pass accreditation reviews and things like that? Can we shorten it from 2 years to 6 months and we're seeing right now, we're still gathering data, but somewhere around 5 to 10x increase in the speed of us doing this through the method that we've developed. And what we're doing is we used to hire instructional designers, psychometricians, subject matter experts, and outsource the work of creating the content. And we had all these training guides on how to do those things, like style guides, content guides, like don't talk about war, don't talk about this issue, just pages and pages of those. We've built prompt engineering to essentially train large language models to do these things. And then we've broken up the curriculum development process into bite-sized chunks. And each one of those chunks is trained by a different agent. And one of the other things I alluded to earlier is called multi-agentic flows. And we actually won a DARPA award for this, and so they funded some of the technology we're adding to our platform. And the idea is you can have one bot that does the planning, another bot does the writing, and then a third evaluates the work of the first three. And using a programmatic approach, we can connect via APIs and speed up this process, but also get a much more rigorous and robust output, because it's amazing if you have, just try this at home, have ChatGPT write something for you, then go have Claude say, Claude, critique this and tell me where it's wrong. Now, generally, neither of them are going to have typos, but if you think about higher level order like strategy and things like that, you're going to see some pretty interesting outcomes from that. And so this is not publicly exposed yet, but internally what we have is our team will go through this process with, essentially we have dozens of these large language models that all create all of the content for us. And so we can go to a university and say their executive education program and say, you've got corporations asking you to create some training, or maybe we want to create, even in undergrad or in high school, we want to create a course. Well, this is going to do all of the hard parts, the slow parts for us, but it's going to validate it with a human in the loop at every step of the way, so that by the time we expose it to the public, they're not really seeing a chatbot, they're seeing something that has been checked by a PhD or a subject matter expert, but the human did 10% of the work and the machines did 90% of the work. So far we're seeing this is working really well. In the state of Alabama, talk about speed to market. We're one of the early states in the country to actually have data science as a math course available in K-12. And so QuantHub actually built an entire applied data science course using this methodology in about 6 months. This is a full year-long course. Teachers' guides, instruction manuals, simulations where students download data sets and do analytics. And again, we leveraged AI, but we had data scientists actually validate the work and ensure that what is being handed to the teacher, being put in the classroom, has been human checked. But what it allowed us to do is really compress that time to market. And now we've got teachers testing it in Virginia and other states around the country as well. And that's going to be increasingly important, because whatever we created in that data science course, how long is that going to be good for? 1 year, 6 months? And so our ability to go through and actually speed that up is pretty substantial. So I would encourage you to, here's the example, the teacher's guides with activities. So I would encourage you to be thinking about in your own job or field, what are some of the ways that I can start testing some of those, brute force work, the slow work. If you haven't done it already and somebody ever asks you for like a job reference or something like that, I basically have my reference letter. I'm going to take 3 or 4 points about this person, and I'm going to have Claude write a new reference letter for me, right? I'll go read it over and say, yes, that looks pretty good, but I'm never going to sit there and write a reference letter from scratch again, but I'm going to take out that 80% in the middle. So what are some of the ways that you can begin thinking about doing this in your fields? So, let me close with this. This exponential chart, as we move from left to right, you recall from math, as you go from left to right, the rise over run increases. And so this pace is going to continue to change. I told you 23% over the next 5 years is the current estimate. That may not be the estimate next year or the year following. So keep in mind the skill inflation. What are some of the things that we can do to continue to add to the skills that we currently have to stay on top of it? And coming to conferences like this is case in point that you guys are drinking the Kool-Aid with me. Like, we got to stay on top of this. So with that, I'll give you a couple of QR codes in case anyone is interested. And I'm also happy to answer some questions here. If I see a couple of younger folks in the audience. We have an internship program. We also have a table out back. Dr. Kelsey Bickett is here with me. Will you raise your hand real quick with Emily Jerkins on our team? She runs our internship program, and we are connecting. So we're in about 100 schools across the state of Alabama. And so we encourage any students, whether they're using QuantHub or not, we can give them access to it to apply for this internship program. This year, we have 35 corporate partners that are going to be offering them internships the summer of their junior or senior year in high school, or for undergraduate students in college as well. And so we will pair you with companies like Alabama Power, Protective Life, EDPA, the Department of Commerce, and we make those corporations pick from a series of jobs that the students will be doing. So this is not like, oh, intern, we'll find a place for you. Go sit over there and we'll give you some work. This is like, no, what are you going to be doing? And so as one example, like EDPA, they do economic development. The intern for them built basically an AI bot that would listen to corporate earnings calls and summarize the data and compress what took weeks down to minutes. And this is I think I was a junior in high school. A junior in high school is writing an AI bot for EDPA for their summer internship. So it's a really cool opportunity. Again, I would encourage you to pass those along. Also on the corporate side, if you want one of these kids, the system is gamified. We have thousands of users across the state. We can basically encourage those top scoring students. A lot of them are just crushing it in terms of completing more skills than they're supposed to, topping the leaderboard. We're saying, let's get them and get them into one of those corporate settings. So if you want to connect with them, there's an opportunity for that. If you are in K-12, if you want QuantHub in your school, it is already paid for by the state. So if you're a public school and you don't have it already, there's a form to fill out there. And then if you're in higher ed, you want to talk to us about some of the things that we're doing there, we certainly would be happy to do that. And with that, I am more than happy to answer any questions.
You had those two drawings. The question is the ethics. Would that be attributed to AI? Your third drawing is the compilation of the two. Ethically, is that an original work of yours, or is it an original work of the AI, or is it not an original work and it could be attributed back to the two previous paintings? I guess, is that the gray area that we're kind of in? There's nothing original about that other than there was combined styles. Where do you think that goes to as far as ethics?
Yeah, so legally, I think we're still in new and untested waters, so we'll see some of this play out in courts. Just Josh's practical tip, what I would suggest is, before you would say Vincent van Gogh, oil on canvas or on cardboard or whatever, I would simply suggest having the artist's name and then whatever AI tool they used to create that. The beauty of the music videos I was showing you guys earlier, like, these are getting to the point where I would actually go listen to some of these songs, not to prepare for my talk, but actually for entertainment value. So we're getting to a point where it almost sort of, it really is a new valid medium. And in fact, a couple years ago, someone used, I believe it was an early version of Midjourney, to create a painting that they labeled it by Midjourney, and they won a Colorado State Fair, and there was this big uproar because it's like, well, it was in the digital art category, but because they used AI, it wasn't fair. But I would suggest, I don't know if we have any artists in the room, but my guess is they don't really like any boundaries being put on what is art. And if you can duct tape a banana to a wall and sell it for millions of dollars, I don't see why you can't use a computer to create something interesting. So, and one more thing I'll say on that, it's interesting. There are a lot of thin veneers of what you can and cannot do. So if you, not this image, but I wanted to create a replica of something in the style of Van Gogh, and if you say that to Midjourney or DALL-E, it'll say I can't do that, and it'll give you some copyright reason. But if you say, new chat, describe the style of Van Gogh in as much depth as you possibly can. How did he paint? How did he approach it? How can you tell a Van Gogh versus something else? It'll give you pages of details. You copy it, starting chat. Hey, create me a painting and use this as your style guide. You'll be like, okay. And then it'll basically create a Van Gogh. So you can kind of do that with everything, but then there's the question around the legal issues. And I would suggest, if you're doing it personally for fun, just do it, have fun. Just make sure you're not violating any laws. If you're in corporate settings, I think there are a lot more conversations that need to be had there just because of the rights and security issues and so forth.
Hey.
Sorry.
I work in government contracting. One of the hurdles we're trying to figure out is how to use AI and automation with proprietary data, classified data. A lot of our process is routine, cradle-to-grave contracting, same form, same process, different contract type, different requirements, but any advice on getting involved despite those hurdles?
So there are a number of models out there that aren't as shiny and flashy as ChatGPT or Claude, and many of them are open source. So what you tend to have to do is put them on your own iron, your own servers. So there's that option. I know ChatGPT or OpenAI announced this week they're going through the FedRAMP process, and they're going to have a GovCloud version of OpenAI. And it sounds like they're asking Trump to expedite that process. FedRAMP normally takes a year or so, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't get it done in a couple of months. So there will be the bigger vendors online soon. But meanwhile, most folks are just using one of the open source models. And it really, I talked about this a little bit earlier. I think DeepSeek has brought this to light. Using ChatGPT is sort of a brute force method. The more you can get specialized in what you're doing, there's going to be a lot of innovation and opportunities in edge AI, and that's, how do you get AI onto a, $100 device? How do you get AI onto that Ring camera? And the way you do that is you really narrow the scope of what those capabilities are. So I want to say Hugging Face may be a good place to look at different models where you can see some of those different. And if you remember back to this chart that I showed you with the different tool capabilities and strengths and weaknesses, you may want to use one of these other models anyway, depending on the specific purpose or application that you're looking for. But by going that route, not only can you get a secure environment, where it's air gapped and all of that sort of stuff, but you can speed up the process, reduce the overall cost of developing your models.
Hi, I'm an educator in Tennessee and interested in if you're expanding outside of the state.
We are available to anyone who wants to talk to us, so certainly would be glad to talk to you, or if you want to talk to one of the folks on our team. We do have a private school in Tennessee that started, and we're also, we've been approved in Texas and I think Utah. We got a couple of other states where we're slowly expanding, so would be more than happy to talk to you.
What kind of messaging are you giving to your software developers at QuantHub as far as staying relevant and with all the latest advancements in like software development tooling, what's kind of your messaging to them?
The use of AI is mandatory. So I was softer 3 months ago, 6 months ago. Hey guys, check this out. And now it's mandatory. With that said, they understand that there are restrictions on what you can and can't do with it, where it's useful and where it's not. And the reason it's mandatory is because we realize that we're in an arms race in terms of just people putting money into the AI industry. And if we get complacent with where we are, we're going to get past. And so using AI to accelerate that process is really critical. We're seeing really every company that's leading in the space do that. Where AI does really well, so two tools that are commonly used, one's called Cursor and another one is called, well, actually Claude. You can, with those projects I was talking about, you can actually upload all of your, or most of your code to Claude and have it write in the context of your system. It's really good for boilerplate type coding and engineering, so stuff that you would normally write from scratch. So those of you that have been in programming or coding, that whole idea of tabbing and it finishes the sentence or the file name, think of that, but doing a page or a paragraph at a time. What it doesn't do great is that higher order thinking around, I don't know if anyone here has written a SQL or a database query that's just like grossly, inefficient, and it's just like, just give me all the database, and I'll figure out what I need from that. No, you should be more efficient doing that. In the same way, where they kind of come up short, if they're copying all the code on the internet, there's a lot of bad code on the internet that sort of can work its way into it. So I would think of it almost like you think of a junior programmer that you need to pair program with, or you need to constantly kind of keep an eye on. And so, hopefully our expectations are that maybe some percentage of each of my engineers' code is being written by AI, but there's certainly a lot of it that still needs that human eye. And one of the areas where it's just kind of like a no-brainer is debugging. Like, just anybody that's been an engineer, how many hours of your life have you lost looking for a semicolon? And so just finding that type of thing is certainly going to be incredibly helpful, I would say.